Welcome back to our walk through the book of Psalms one by one. Apologies for the silence for a few days. I've been beset by other priorities and unable to give any attention to this, but it's great to be back. We're looking at Psalm 9 today. Another comment just about these walkthroughs. They're not scripted presentations. They're simply my top of the head reflections on Psalms as we look through them. So we're at Psalm 9. Which is another one to the choir master, according to Mutlaben, which is probably a tune, and then we're told again that it's a Psalm of David. Now, the moment you open any commentary to Psalm 9, the first thing it's going to talk about is whether Psalm 9 is an individual psalm or whether it goes with Psalm 10 to make one psalm. In your English Bible, there are two psalms. Same in the Hebrew text that underlies your English Bible. In the Latin and Greek, the ancient Latin and Greek versions of the book of Psalms, they're actually combined into one psalm. And there are a number of reasons that could account for that. The first observation is that Psalm 9 has a typical title, Psalm 10 does not. Now, in book 1 of the Psalms, which is Psalms 1 to 41, almost every psalm, except the two introductory ones, has a psalm title. The only other exception is Psalms 32 and 33. So the absence of a psalm title is striking, and the inference is that Psalm 10 actually falls under the title of Psalm 9 because they may originally have been one composition. Another observation that's frequently made is that this is an acrostic psalm. An acrostic psalm is a psalm that begins the first verse with the Hebrew equivalent of the letter A, and then the next verse with the letter B, and so it grows through the alphabet. And the acrostic goes through Psalm 9 and 10. So you've got a single acrostic running through both psalms. However, it's not a complete or perfect acrostic, so that indication would suggest one entity, but it's not done completely. On the other hand, there are quite distinct changes of tone and theme between Psalms 9 and 10. So depending on which commentator you read, you're going to find some saying they are one psalm, some saying they are two psalms. Pay your money, take your pick. I think it's a toss-up with a coin kind of decision. The next interesting dilemma with Psalm 9, which is probably best classified as an individual lament, but the next dilemma with Psalm 9 is to try and make some sense of its structure. When you first read through it, it's difficult to have any kind of order or structure emerge from the psalm. So how do we understand its structure? Well, one popular suggestion, if I can just paste this across, so this is a tool in Logos called the Psalms Explorer, really nice tool. Logos Bible software, and they identify the psalm as a chiasm. A chiasm is a psalm that is structured A, B, C, B, A. In other words, it goes this way and then back, and the focus lies on the middle point. Now, some scholars like to identify many psalms as acrostics, and they'll try to match the first part to the last part and the second part to the second last part, and so on. So if you look at the proposal here in Logos Bible software, you'll see they have the A part, the first strophe labeled praise, and they label the last strophe prayer. And then the second part is God judged the enemy, matches God judges the wicked, and so on. The testimony that God saves is the next part, the prayer that God will save the righteous, and then they see the middle part as this exhortation to praise. So that's one proposal as to the structure. I'm generally a little bit skeptical of chiastic structuring of psalms. There are a few that are clear. Psalm 8, very clear. Psalm 9, not so clear. And often the chiasms that are proposed are less than convincing in my mind. This could be, but it's not completely conclusive whether it's chiastic. In fact, when you read Psalm 9, it seems like it keeps changing theme. Every strophe seems to, or every couple of strophes, it seems to change theme. It almost reads like a psychological hymn, like a psychological poem, rather. In other words, that there's these emotions running high and he's jumping from one theme to another, from one topic to another. And the only coherence seems to be a few common thematic ideas. So difficult to see a very coherent logical structure. It's more an emotive poem, high emotions running through it. Let's read through it. Strophe by strophe, we've got 20 verses, 10 strophes in the ESV. So 2 verses per strophe, and almost every strophe has 2 poetic lines in it with 2 phrases per line. So this typical 4-phrase structure. I will give thanks to the Lord with my whole heart. I will recount all of your wonderful deeds. I will be glad and exult in you. I will sing praise to your name, O Most High. At first glance, you would think this might be a thanksgiving psalm because of the emphasis on giving God thanks for all of his wonderful deeds. As the psalm progresses, it seems that there are still prayers needing to be prayed, and there are also hints of answered prayer. So the classification of lament is open to debate, but praising God for his wonderful deeds is where we open. When my enemies turn back, they stumble and perish before your presence. What kind of parallelism is this? This would be called synthetic parallelism, because the second phrase doesn't echo the first phrase. It's not inherently similar. It simply completes the first phrase. Together, these make one thought. When my enemies turn back, they stumble and perish before your presence. For you have maintained my just cause. You have sat on your throne giving righteous judgment. This is one of the pictures of God that will permeate through the psalm, that he is a powerful and righteous judge who's going to vindicate the righteous and punish the wicked for their sin, which is associated with the psalmist's enemies. He continues, you've not only rebuked the wicked, you've rebuked nations, you've made the wicked perish, you've blotted out their name forever and ever. Notice the escalation. So typically the 2 halves, the 2 phrases that make a poetic line, especially when that line is synonymous parallelism, you're often going to find some kind of escalation. You have rebuked, you have blotted out. Blotted out is a bit more serious than rebuked. You see the escalation in God's dealings being portrayed. The enemy came to an end in everlasting ruins. Their cities you rooted out. The very memory of them has perished. Again, notice that it's a similar idea being developed, but there is decided development as God punishes the wicked. Then we return again to reflect on the Lord. So the focus having been on the wicked and the enemies here in the second and third little strophes. Now the focus returns to the Lord. You can see he's the focus of verses 7 through 12. Very directly, they're directed at the Lord. He sits enthroned forever. He has established his throne for justice. He judges the world in righteousness. He judges the peoples in uprightness. So a 4-fold refrain about Yahweh, who is the king on a throne of justice, who judges the world and the peoples uprightly. Notice that he's not just the parochial God of Israel. He is the God who judges nations and peoples. The whole world is under the authority of his righteous judgment. Still on the Lord is a stronghold for the oppressed, a stronghold in times of trouble. Stronghold is a place of safety, a place where you can run to in times of trouble and feel safe and secure because there are defenses that protect you. Yahweh is a stronghold for the oppressed when they're in times of trouble. So this portrait that the Lord is a safe space to run to. Notice, we've been talking about him judging the nations, but he's not only the king who judges the nations righteously, he is also a stronghold, a compassionate protector of those who know his name and put their trust in him. He doesn't forsake those who seek him. And so we have an outburst of an exhortation to praise the Lord, sing praises to the Lord who sits enthroned, tell among the people his deeds. Synonymous parallelism. This second one, you sing praises, but you also tell his deeds to peoples. These are two legitimate ways of glorifying and praising the Lord. For he who avenges blood is mindful of them and does not forget the cry of the afflicted. So we see simultaneously here God as the avenger and also as this place of safety or refuge for the afflicted, and he's praised for both of those. Isn't that an interesting thought? That we praise Yahweh both in his role as righteous judge and avenger and in his role as compassionate, merciful source of comfort and grace in times of need. And therefore he prays, be gracious to me, O Lord, see my affliction from those who hate me. So we've got this prayer. What you notice here is this constant chopping and changing of a few themes. Yahweh as king, as judge, as place of safety, as avenger, nations that are wicked, and then the righteous who are afflicted and find their safety and security in seeking the Lord. He jumps again. The nations have sunk into the pit they made. And the portrait that emerges here is that Yahweh judges them by applying the law of sowing and reaping to them. The wicked shall return to Sheol, all the nations that forget God, for the needy shall not always be forgotten, and the hope of the poor shall not perish. And he ends it with a prayer. Arise, O Lord, let not man prevail. Let the nations be judged before you. Put them in fear of you, O Lord. Let the nations know that they are but men. If ever there was a time for us to pray, verses 19 and 20 over the nations of the world, it might be right in this moment, especially the Western world, that the nations would know that they are but men. But men. Let God arise, let not man prevail. So what do we have here? I think it's a lament in a time of pressure and crisis with overtones of trust and thanksgiving. And it's not a nice flowing logical composition. It seems to chop and change between a few themes. That's common of acrostics. When you're trying to start each section with the next letter of the alphabet, often the structure is sacrificed in order to have the mnemonic or memory device in place. So that's Psalm 9. We'll do Psalm 10 next time.